Turned out to be more disgruntled employee than terrorism, but police say it was definitely a planned attack and by two people who were dressed and armed like soldiers. It was just before 11 this morning here at the Inland Regional Center in San Bernardino, a county office which helps the developmentally disabled. A gathering for the public health.
Hello everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, and Daniel, it's good to see you today.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. I'd like to talk about the big issue of the day. It's been around for a while, and it's grossly distorted all the time. And that's all about guns and gun violence and what we ought to do about it. And it seems like every time we have an episode, there's a few people out front, including our president, without even knowing the answers or what's going on. Well, we have to take away the rights of the people to own guns, and that's going to solve all the problems. And that looks like what's going on. They want to pass laws and take away these rights. But, you know, sometimes I think they get misled. They also yesterday talked a bit about motives. You know, they do that all the time in domestic violent murder cases. And why did he do it? Why did he do it? And yesterday, the whole thing, you know, was why did he do it? If these guys did it, why did they do it? But their main goal is to try to connect it to Islam and terrorism so that the reaction might even involve foreign policy like the killings were in Paris. So they want to do this, but they don't really want to know what the motive is. You know, in this instance, we may find out what the motive is. Maybe it was something to do with workplace violence or something. I mean, and the killings, you know, go on all the time, and they look for it, but they never want to find out the motive might be related to stupid policies of our government that precipitates violence. Not that I'm suggesting that yesterday's violence was related, but who knows if even if it is related to our foreign policies, it's never implicates us having some responsibility. It's always going to be that there's a bunch of people out there that don't like us because we're great. We're exceptional people, and they want to get rid of it. So I'm sure you must have had an immediate reaction yesterday, and you sat and watched TV all day long watching these programs, or were you unable to sustain that?
No, I looked at alternative means. Twitter is a great way of scanning things. But you know, it's interesting. The first few hours after something like this happens, it's I think the most fascinating time because you hear the most outrageous things being reported by the news, and they go down the memory hole because they're completely outrageous. But like you said, it's interesting that special interests, interests seem to glom onto something like this to push their agendas. You point out the gun control people, the anti-Muslim people, and when something happens, they jump in and they draw to their conclusions, and they build hysteria among the people.
You know, the one thing I don't think they have a high concern about is just the numbers of people or people being killed. Yeah, it's significant. What was it, 14 yesterday, and 130 in Paris, and all this, and that's serious. But you know, there's a lot of people dying in this country from violence. There's estimate that there's 45 people have died since this thing broke yesterday. 45 people a day get killed with inner city violence, and nobody's asking, well, who's responsible for this? You know, and it's, but if there's something that they can tie international and something where they can attack us and enhance big government, that's different. But take the incident where that atrocious episode occurred where the policeman went nuts. It shot 16 times to a guy that was unarmed and down and shot him in the back. Well, it sounds to me like government control of guns is what we have to address. I mean, what are these guys doing? But no, are they going to take the guns from the policemen or curtail police violence? No, they're going to curtail the rights of the people to defend themselves, the right of ownership of self-defense, and that's what they're going to deal with. So when you think of how many people are dying in the inner city, think of how many people die in the drug war. Did they ever say, well, yeah, I guess the real reason is the stupid laws that we have. They don't do that. And same way with highway deaths. There's 35,000 deaths a year and on government highways. But but where's the real concern about it? But and I think you've already mentioned this, but when they can politicize it, 2 deaths or 10 deaths or 14 deaths become very valuable property. So the number of lives aren't too important. And if they can some way or another tie this into terrorism, boy, they feel like they have a gold mine.
And it really was a bit chilling yesterday, the mob mentality. And we even saw today in a magazine that is otherwise, I think, generally in agreement with a lot of what you have to say. The American Conservative ran an article by Philip Jenkins, who's a professor at Baylor, who said, I hate to say it, but now I agree with Trump. We've got to start watching these mosques. He said, it is shocking that anyone is shocked by Trump wanting the surveillance of mosques.
Yeah. See, and they want to work it into this clash between Islam and the West and the clash of civilizations. But I think there is a clash, but I don't think it's this so-called civilization thing. I think it has to do with those of us who believe in liberty and limited local government versus those who like big government and are authoritarians. And of course, the people who are using these incidents are the authoritarians. They want big government, and they want UN banning of guns and all these things. So, but they never really talk about the deaths caused by government guns. And I'm not talking about when you have a declared war where you truly are defending your country, which is a legitimate function. But I'm talking about, the last 14 years of our wars in the Middle East, killing, and as a consequence, millions have died. And but nobody seems to ask about that, and nobody says, take away the guns of these people. Why should a single guy in a so-called free society have the authority to assassinate Americans and drone people and kill innocent people? It's collateral damage. In comparison, I see that as so much a greater threat. Our real threat is what's happening with our government's abuse of our liberties than the problems that we face when somebody does a violent act like this. Because I think violence and killing is going to be with us for a long time to come. But I'm also convinced that it can be curtailed better with local, controls and proper gun laws where people are allowed to defend themselves. But it just seems like, once again, I've mentioned it before, that the propaganda machine seems that's where we come up short, even though I believe we're on the side of logic and we're on the side, I think, of a lot of people.
I think you made a good point just before we started. Every time one of these things happens, we're actually the victims. The law-abiding people, the 99.99% that don't break the law, are the ones they tell us we have to lose some of our freedoms. Here's an interesting quote from the article, and I think it is really quite chilling. He said, if you do not maintain radical mosques under surveillance, you may as well abandon any and all pretense of trying to limit or suppress terrorism on U.S. soil.
It's back to the clash of civilization type thing.
Our friend Phil Giraldi, who's been on the show a couple of times, he had a good comment in the comments section. He said, this opens the door for all of us to be surveilled at the whim of some bureaucrat.
And unfortunately, that's what's going on. When you think about going through the TST lines at the airports, we are so abused there, and our rights are abused. But how did that happen? Those changes came under this pretense that the world was coming to an end. They misjudged what 9/11 was all about, and the Patriot Act gets passed, and all these things, and so it's we that did that. And I remember arguing and debating it with other members, and they said, yeah, but they agreed with my theoretical argument for liberty. They said, yeah, but the American people are scared, and I have to vote for this. And that is really where the real problem is when you have a crisis, there's always somebody going to be bouncing forward, and the more the louder he can be, or an individual can be, the more likely he'll be attracted to people who have been frightened. We've conditioned our people to be frightened and dependent. If they're frightened about where they're going to get fed, they don't have to work harder. The government will take care of them forever until the government goes broke and the people go broke. So under these conditions, whether they're physically threatened or economically threatened, they always go and say, let government take care of us.
You make a good point about the TSA, because it would be absolutely objectionable, all of these curtailments of our liberties, even if they did work and prevented this. But we see that the TSA, 96% of the time, fails to discover bombs, guns, all sorts of contraband. This was a recent test. So they don't even, it doesn't even work. It makes insult to injury.
Well, and I think that's obviously true about the gun issue too. You could take all those guns away from people, more registration, and they'll still get guns. I think a pretty good example of this is take Paris. I understand their laws are very, very strict against gun. There's no guns in that city, and yet it didn't prevent that from happening. So they get a twofer again. They get, well, guns are bad, and we have to have even more laws, and it's part of this this clash of civilization that we've probably initiated, or at least a large participant in, because we've gone a long way from home to get people upset with us. But I'd like to make the point that we should be more accurate in diagnosing it, get the motive, and then the treatment might be a little bit different, rather than jumping the gun and satisfying their instincts and their desires to build even bigger government. More authoritarians will take over.
Yeah, and the media has a responsibility that they don't live up to, because they're rushing for headlines and to beat the other guys out, to not hype these things up and use information they have not checked.
And of course, that's why we exist, because I think everybody knows that comes to this program realize that they're not getting the full scoop from the media, and that we make a sincere effort to offer an alternative explanation. But it is not a complex explanation. It's based on personal liberty and local government and minimal government. It's not based on hypothetical things about clashes of internationalism that requires even more government and more government bombs and more government guns, and protect the government and their guns. The left ought to be held responsible for a lot of this problem in that, especially internationally. They say take away the guns, but they never want to take away the guns of the government. And it's government's guns, whether it's in the military or the government guns in the police force, it causes so much trouble that we need to make the right diagnosis. No, in a free and a perfect, it can't be a perfect society. But the striving for has to be for liberty, not for authoritarian government, and not for dependency on government. And that we have a better understanding that the purpose of government is to protect liberty. It's not to take care of us from cradle to grave. It's not to take care of us on all our moral behavior, nonviolent, of course. It's not for the government there to run the and regulate the economy and have a Federal Reserve System that thinks they know how to fix interest rates and know which people ought to be bailed out. And it's not a world where we can go around the world and go thousands of miles away from our home and pretending that we are so wise that we can police the world. Those ideas has to change. You know what is amazing is that is more or less what George W. Bush ran on in 2000. He claimed he wasn't for policing the world, and we shouldn't interfere in the affairs of other nations. And look at what happened. And that goes back, can we trust our politicians? Not easily, but we certainly ought to work in the direction of putting the pressure on the politicians to live up to the ideals of what a free society is all about. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.